Hello, I'm Derek Thompson. I'm a staff writer here at The Atlantic. Thank you for joining us for our special Election Day virtual event. Of course, the presidential race is something on everybody's minds today. It's something we've been looking forward to or dreading for the last 4 years, 1,453 days, I believe, since the last election. The polls in most swing states do show Joe Biden with a small lead, and forecasts predict that he has about a 90% chance of defeating Donald Trump in this election, but it hasn't stopped a lot of heartburn for Democratic voters who are clearly bracing for another 2016 surprise, including some major polling errors that we could potentially see or potentially not. And of course, even if Democrats do win the White House, there are a lot of eyes on the Senate, on Congress, on down ballot elections, on state legislatures. The battle between blue America and red America is taking place at every single level today. Lot to discuss, and we are joined today by two Atlantic political reporters. Ron Brownstein is a senior editor at The Atlantic and a political analyst. His most recent article, which came out this week, is entitled "Why the 2020s Could Be as Dangerous as the 1850s." And Christian Paz is an assistant editor with our politics team at The Atlantic. He's been writing about how Latino voters are voting in Florida, in Texas, across the South and throughout the country, and how their vote and shifts within the Latino electorate could change the election results we see later tonight. He has also had the challenging but important task of chronicling President Trump's lies about the coronavirus. So we'll ask a little bit about that. We know you guys have a lot of questions of your own for Ron and Christian. You can ask those questions by writing to us in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Keep them short and on topic, and feel free to tell us where you are from. We'll try to weave as many of these questions as possible into our conversation in the next half hour. So now let's bring in Ron and Christian. Hello, welcome.
Hey, good morning.
To you both. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning. Hey, guys.
Happy Election Day.
Happy
Wow.
Election Day. Well, yeah, I don't know about the adjective, but certainly Election Day, yes. So Ron, let's start with you. 4 years ago, you were one of a small handful of people, including Dave Wasserman, who were seeing some cracks in Hillary's blue wall among the upper Midwest states at the end of October and early November. And those cracks that you saw very clearly presaged the complete collapse of that wall on November 8th, 2016. So I've been really interested, as someone who's really highly attuned to congressional polling, to demographics, to these little canaries in the coal mine that might tell us a few days or a few weeks out what's going to happen on election day. The same way that you were paying attention to Hillary's collapse 4 years ago in rural and non-college white voter areas, is there anything that you're seeing this year that could maybe surprise us or give either side more reason to be confident that the polls are definitely right or potentially wrong?
Great question, Derek. Can I start with a bit of Atlantic media boosterism? Because it was in National Journal, our sister publication, in January 2009 that I coined the phrase "the blue wall" and created the concept. There's a great National Journal headline, "The Blue Wall," which I think I should make my Twitter, background, given how much it's in the news.
You've earned it.
Well, look, I believe, as you know, for many years have believed that the fundamental dividing line in American politics is between those who welcome the way the country is changing demographically, culturally, and economically, and those who fear or resent the way the country is changing, what I've called the coalition of transformation and the coalition of restoration. Donald Trump won in 2016 because the coalition of restoration gave every last ounce in this election. He mobilized incredible turnout and margins in small town, exurban, and rural America. And he mobilized the biggest margin among non-college whites for any nominee in either party since Ronald Reagan in 1984. The coalition of transformation turned out too, but there were just slight cracks in its support for Clinton. For example, young people, she only got 55% of their votes, down from the 66 and 60% that Obama got, as many of them drifted to third parties. Turnout was slightly down in places like Philadelphia, down by more in Milwaukee and Detroit, cities with big African-American populations. So you could say that in 2016, the coalition of restoration consolidated to an incredible extent, and the coalition of transformation splintered just a little. I think we're on track for the opposite. I would say in 2020. I've not written that, but it just kind of, that really is kind of the formula here. it is likely that Metro America, diverse, well-educated, info-age Metro America, by which I mean not only urban centers, but the inner suburbs of every big metropolitan area in the country, is going to vote against Trump in unprecedented numbers. I mean, our politics today really is, you can draw a imaginary beltway around every major city in the country. And inside of that beltway, whether it's Atlanta, Houston, or Dallas, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, or Chicago, it is getting more blue. And in this election, those places are going to get a lot more blue. I mean, Trump lost 87 of the 100 largest counties in America by a combined 15 million votes. His counties accounted for only 1/3 of the GDP. High output, dense America voted heavily for Clinton. It is going to vote more heavily for Biden. And I think that reduces the election. Trump, by the way, Biden could win over 90 of the 100 largest counties. He could win them, I think, by something approaching 20 million votes. So to me, that reduces the election to one question. Can Trump turn out enough voters outside of those beltways and those predominantly white, predominantly Christian, small town, exurban, rural places? And can he hold the margins? Because as a final thought before, I don't want to filibuster here.
It's great.
Any Democratic nominee, given the antipathy toward Trump, given the way Trump has belittled and attacked and governed in opposition to those big metros, any Democratic nominee could expect bigger margins than Hillary Clinton got inside of the big urban areas and inner suburbs. Biden's unique contribution may be that he has the capacity to sand down just a little Trump's margins in those mid-sized blue-collar cities around the country that were so important for him: Erie and Racine and Janesville and Kenosha and Youngstown. It is noteworthy that yesterday Biden was in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. Well, what's the big deal about that? Hillary Clinton lost Beaver County, Pennsylvania by 20 points. When was the last time a candidate was in a county on the day before the election that they lost by 20 points? It is revealing of his strategy that sanding down the margins in Trump country is as important as blowing off the doors in what is becoming kind of the blue Metro America.
That's a great answer, Ron. So I'm really interested in what you're going to be looking for tonight between, say, 7 o'clock and 9:30 when we get sort of this first batch of data in.
Right.
Go ahead.
That above all, Derek. I mean, I think I will be watching those. If I had to say one thing I'll be watching, it is whether Biden can improve in some of these Trump country places.
Right.
Whether it's Pasco and Volusia in Florida, or if we have any results out of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I think that above all. And then the second thing I'll be watching is the extent to which the big story of 2018 was that the suburban recoil against Trump that was evident in 2016 not only intensified in the places that we've already seen it, like Northern Virginia and Philadelphia, Minneapolis, it extended across the Sun Belt: Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, even Charleston. That's the second thing I'll be watching. So the first thing I'll be watching will be blue collar, industrial, mid-sized cities in the north. But the second thing will be, how big does Mecklenburg get? How big does Wake County get? What happens in Gwinnett and Cobb? Hillary Clinton won Gwinnett and Cobb. It was a big deal when she won them those are the big suburban counties outside Atlanta. It was a big deal when she won Gwinnett and Cobb by 26,000 votes. Stacey Abrams won them by 75,000 votes. How big does that get? What is not only the final totals in the big Texas metros, the 5 big urban counties in Texas? Hillary Clinton won them by 560,000 votes. Biden could win them by double that. But then what happens in the next ring? Williamson and Hayes and Fort Bend and Denton and Collin. So the two things I guess I'll be watching is the mid-sized industrial cities in the north and the white-collar suburbs in the south.
That's great. That's a great roadmap. Thank you, Ron. Christian, let's talk about Florida. So this is going to be a very strange election where we're going to be very curious about what happens in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, but those votes are actually going to come in really, really slowly. We shouldn't probably expect any answer or any call on those states until Wednesday at the earliest. On the other hand, Florida is, I think, in an article that's about to come out in about 50 minutes on the Atlantic site, a roadmap that I wrote. I compare Florida to like a 90-minute horror film, a very efficient white knuckle ride that's going to report its votes relatively quickly because of how early it's been counting its ballots. And we're probably going to learn, unless it's like a 0.3% margin, who's won the state at some point later tonight or very early tomorrow morning. A big issue in Florida is the Latino vote. The Latino vote nationwide has tended to go for Democrats by about 2-1, 64, by about somewhere between 60-40 and 2-1 in the last few cycles. But in Florida, there is some indication that the vote is roughly 50-50 among Latinos. Help us understand what's going on with the Latino vote in Florida, and how it breaks down, say, by country of origin and even by age.
Definitely. So I think one of the most interesting things to see when people discuss the Latino vote is this idea of Latinos being a monolith, or voting all in one direction, or having one central priority that guides them when they get to the ballot box. Florida is one of those interesting states where you have an incredibly diverse Latino population. They come from Cuba, they come from Venezuela, they come from other parts in Central America or Mexico, but it's not as, dominated by one single kind of country of origin. So you do see some interesting polling coming out about how Cuban Americans are splitting when it comes to their support for Biden versus Trump. One thing that was interesting to see is that in 2016, Trump improved his standing among Cuban Americans relative to the way that Mitt Romney performed among them. There is some indication that in 2020, he could run up the score a bit more among Cuban American voters because of this constant messaging focused on socialism and big government and the legacy and specter of the communist regime. Another important thing to take note in Florida is, the sizable Puerto Rican population in the state, which, has a legacy of Trump's mishandling of the hurricane that hit the island, and that displacement that occurred when a lot of American citizens from the island moved to Florida as a result of that. It's interesting to note also in my conversations with voters that they aren't all guided by one singular priority. There's, some breakdown among, how much of their interests or what interest comes first when it comes to healthcare versus education versus the economy, handling of COVID-19. And we have seen Florida be one of those hot spots this summer when it comes to the pandemic, and that will definitely be top of mind in a lot of Latinos, analysis when it comes to making their decision.
Right. Christian, I'm really, really interested in the gender gap in American politics, and specifically the gender gap within the Latino electorate. So the gender gap as a sort of point of history is really fascinating. There really was no evidence of any gender gap in the US electorate before 1980. It was only in 1981 in a Washington Post article about Reagan's election that the term was coined, the gender gap. It's grown and grown over the last 40 years. It was the highest ever in 2016, and it's probably going to be the highest, even higher in 2020. If you break out the gender gap by ethnicity, you see it's large among Black voters, it's even larger among white voters, and it's largest among Latino voters. Do you have any theory about why Latinos versus Latinas seem to vote even more differently than the gender gap exists within other ethnicities or other groups?
Definitely. So this has been interesting also when I've been doing reporting and talking to folks who kind of confirm some of those suspicions that I've had about, how much of it is Trump's masculinity or appeal to kind of a machista sense within the community. How much of it is, Trump's rhetoric and the way that he handles himself that turns off Latina voters in a similar way to how he's turned off white women also. And how much of it comes down to just specific issues and priorities that Trump talks about or tries to message on. One of the things that's been interesting is how much of a difference there is when it comes to educational opportunity within the Latino community. The fact that Latinas go to college and get higher education at higher rates than Latino men do. And what kinds of opportunities, economic opportunities, come with that. I've seen some interesting, responses from folks where a lot of Latino men answer questions about the election and answer questions about Donald Trump in similar ways to white and working class men might respond. So you mentioned that the racial gap might be closing versus the gender gap might be opening. A lot of that also has to do with the fact that a lot of, some 60% of the Latino community in the United States are US born or are not immigrants. They identify more with, what a different kind of American idea or a different idea of what Americanness is, or might want to aspire to a kind of assimilationist definition of what America is. And that also comes across in the way that some of these voters have spoken to me about, Trump's messaging on family and on social conservativeness, and the importance of providing for your family and the importance of protecting your honor and protecting your dignity in a way that Trump doesn't let go of insults or slights very easily. Those are all competing theories. I don't think there's one single one, but it is confirmed in a lot of these conversations that I've been having.
Yeah, I think those are really good theories, and I'm particularly interested in and put a lot of stock in the fact that with the Latino vote specifically, and really with the gender gap entirely, what you're looking at is, yes, a gap between male voters and female voters, but also a gap between the college and non-college vote in a period where women are more likely to get bachelor's degrees and even advanced degrees. Ron, please go ahead.
It holds in both, though. I mean, there's a huge gender gap among college and non-college white men and women, for example. So all of these. By the way, you could throw marriage in, like I once did for national. Like all three of these variables work among whites, and I suspect they work among Latinos too. Although the samples usually aren't big enough to test it. And that is, married voters are more Republican than single voters. Non-college voters are more Republican than college voters, and men are more Republican than women. So if you look, for example, about married non-college white men, they are the most Republican group in the white electorate. Single college white women are the most Democratic group in the electorate. Right. And every group aligns along the spectrum the way you would expect. But what's going to happen? I think what's happening this time, right? I mean, again, to go back to where we started, in 2016, Trump consolidated the coalition of restoration to an incredible extent. And there was just enough fracturing in the coalition of transformation to allow him to win. Now, look at what you've got. On the transformation side, Biden is in position to win college-educated whites by the largest margin ever for any Democratic nominee ever. It is entirely possible that millennials and Gen Z will give him margins approaching Obama in 2008, much more than Clinton. And by the way, this year, for the first time in 40 years, baby boomers are not the largest, unquestionably the largest group in the electorate. They are equal this time for the first time by millennials and Z. And so you've got, and even though you may have some improvement for Trump among Black men and Hispanic men, the towering levels of opposition among women limits how far you can go in kind of changing those numbers. In fact, there's national polling out with Biden in the low to mid 60s among Hispanics overall, which is only slightly below Clinton, and at 89% among Black voters, which is roughly equal. So you've got consolidation on the one side, but on the other side, Biden has recovered to around 40% or more among non-college whites in all of the key Rust Belt states. I mean, the polling is unbelievably similar from state to state. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, even Minnesota, Iowa, Ohio, and from different pollsters. I mean, they all come back with Biden somewhere between 55 and 62 among college whites, 75 and 85 among African-American populations where there are, and then right around 40% of non-college whites in those Rust Belt states. Doesn't sound great, but Hillary Clinton was at 35% or below, usually 33% or below. And so clawing back, again, not only running up the score where you're strong, but reducing the deficit where you're weak is absolutely essential to the Biden formula for victory. And you can see it in his travel. I mean, he hasn't traveled that much, but when he has, he's put himself in front of blue collar audiences in the Rust Belt, usually in counties that weren't very good for the Democrats.
Right. I kind of think of it like, I guess sports analogies are cliche here, but it's kind of like if you're playing a team that has a better passing game than you don't need to pass for more yards than that team. Yeah. If you stop that opposing team's quarterback just a little bit, it gives you a chance to win because you blunted a little bit their strongest advantage. Ron, you've talked a lot about and have written a lot about Democrats running up their advantage in large metro areas, especially in the South. I remember hearing from you a year ago, 2 years ago, about Maricopa County, which essentially means Phoenix, and how maybe I think under Clinton, she lost it just barely. Obama clearly lost Maricopa County, Phoenix, but bit by bit, Democrats have increased their advantage in places like Phoenix, in places like Dallas and San Antonio and Austin and Atlanta. I want to focus this question on Texas, because there are a lot of Democrats right now who I think are licking their chops, watching this massive turnout happen in Texas. help me understand how you're going to be watching the state tonight. What
Sure.
counties, what metro areas you're going to focus on to say this huge advantage in this city, this county, this metro area in Texas is what Democrats need if they have any chance of achieving the dream of turning Texas blue.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, Derek, I mean, the tipping point of this particular election will probably be whether Biden can win back enough non-college whites to regain the blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. But the most lasting impact of this election is going to be the indication of the Sun Belt metros and inner suburbs following what we saw in the north and along the coasts over the last 30 years. I mean, that is a seismic change in American politics. If the Atlanta metro is not quite Northern Virginia, but on that same moving walkway. And the same is true for Dallas and Houston. And, what I said to you was Maricopa County was the one county in America that I was willing to say that if Democrats win Maricopa, they are going to win. I don't know if there's another county I could say that about unequivocally. You pick one county.
And it's a huge county. It's not just that it's predictive.
It was the largest county in the U.S. that Trump won.
Right.
And no Democratic presidential nominee has won it since Harry Truman in 1948. But it embodies kind of this metro, it embodies the breadth of the metro recoil from the Trump vision of the GOP, which is based so much on the resentments of kind of the racial and cultural resentments of kind of small town America. And I thought Maricopa would be the symbol of this election, but it's pretty clear it's going to be Harris County and the big metros in Texas. I mean, if Biden wins, even if he doesn't win Texas, the outpouring of voting in the big metros in Texas, I think really encapsulates the price that the Republicans are paying for this strategy that Trump has imposed on them. As you know, as I often call it, Trump's strategy is squeezing bigger margins from the places and groups that are shrinking at the price of provoking the places and groups that are growing. And there is no business in the world that would have that as a long-term strategy, dominate the declining markets and writing off the growing markets. You know that better than I do. So in Texas, look, it really is going to be a tale of three states. Biden is going to win Metro Texas in all likelihood by something around 1 million votes. And by Metro Texas, I mean what it's called the Texas Triangle, the metro areas of Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas, Fort Worth. That's about 70% of the economy. It's about 75% of the total economic output in the state. And this year, for the first time, it is likely to cross and be 70% of the votes. Trump is going to win rural Texas, which is only about a little over 20% of the vote. He's going to win that by 50 points. So he's going to have a margin in rural Texas of something like 1.2 or 1.3 million votes. And Biden will probably come out of the core cities with like 1.1, 1.2, an incredible number, double Hillary's number. And he'll give up a little in the suburban areas, but not nearly as much as they used to because Democrats are more competitive there. So it's kind of a close balance, slightly leaning toward the rural. And to me, the issue is going to be what kind of turnout and margins do they get in the heavily Hispanic parts of the state. That's the third, tale of three cities, kind of El Paso and the Rio Grande Valley. Problem Democrats have is there hasn't been, their politics is the primary. It's so heavily Democratic, politics is the primary. There's not a really big tradition of turning out on election day. There has not been a lot of money spent there. Beto did a lot of things right in 2018, but he didn't spend money there. Democrats haven't really had the money to spend there. This time, all the money has gone on to into these suburban districts where they have a genuine chance to flip the Texas State House. So to me, it almost doesn't matter whether Biden wins or not. I mean, you can see the pathway toward Democrats winning, which is in 2024, which is to maximize the vote, which is already moving toward them in these metros, and then to invest more in the political infrastructure in the Valley to turn out some more vote there. I think it is possible. I do think it's possible that Biden wins because if the turnout goes up high enough, I mean, you just run out of people in rural Texas. I mean, Nacogdoches can only keep pace with Houston for so long, or Odessa, can only keep pace with Dallas for so long. So it's possible, the safe bet is rural saves him one more time. But boy, if you are losing the metros in Texas, we're not talking Colorado or California, by 1 million votes, that is just as dramatic a statement as you can get about how Trump is exiling the Republican Party from the fast-growing places that really are defining 21st century America.
Right, and why Texas might be a purple state going forward into the 2020s.
It's real. It's real. Yeah, it's not going away.
Right. Christian, help us understand the differences between the Latino vote in Florida versus places like Texas and Arizona, particularly in terms of geographical origin and generation number. Does that help to explain why Florida tends to be a little bit more conservative than Texas and Arizona?
I think that I think that explains a lot of it, but not all of it. The most interesting thing to notice, right, is Florida has an incredibly diverse Latino population. Other states like Arizona and Texas have overwhelmingly large Mexican American populations, or folks who are descended or have Mexican American heritage, which means that, you know, in those states, the more traditional Democratic appeal makes more sense to invest in and to focus on. So when you are talking about, you know, Donald Trump's rhetoric about immigrants, his actions on immigration policy, about, you know, economic opportunity, those are opportunities for Democrats to really, you know, capitalize on, whereas those kinds of messages might not make as sense in Florida, for example. You know, we've talked about the Rio Grande Valley, we've talked about Maricopa County, areas where Latinos, if they were to turn out, would help to, you know, make a significant dent in Republican hold of those states, which is, you know, why Arizona has been a target for the Biden campaign. Ron mentioned the fact that, you know, Democrats haven't invested as much in Texas, in the southern region where, you know, where Latinos tend to live closer to the border, which is, you know, an opportunity for future infrastructure investment and get out the vote and engagement. But this is something actually that, you know, the Biden campaign has stumbled on across the Sun Belt, where, you know, you go back to the primaries like Ron talked about. This is where, you know, Bernie Sanders performed really well in getting out the Latino vote and in, you know, engaging young Latinos who are US born, who are more progressive, who might respond more to, you know, a future vision of what the Democratic Party might look like, versus, you know, what the Biden campaign has been doing to, you know, catch up to some of the longer term Trump investment. So when it comes to like national origin and when it comes to generations, right, younger folks, you know, are more progressive. They might not have as much of an, you know, a connection to the immigrant experience of some of their parents or grandparents, which also makes the, you know, immigration policy first message not as effective for them. But why it also makes sense to, you know, view these young Latino voters as you would view other non-Latino voters, in the sense of focusing on, you know, education, healthcare, the economy, things that they care about. When you poll Latinos, immigration tends not to be the top priority for them. It's usually healthcare, the economy, or education. And when you look at what some of the progressive messaging on the Democratic side about, you know, making college more affordable, making healthcare more affordable, increasing access to healthcare, that is what resonates with young Latino voters, who will be the ones who, you know, from this election, from 2016 to this election, somewhere around 4 million more Latino voters are eligible to vote. That's an incredible amount. And if the early vote can tell us anything, what it can tell us is it seems that there are more young Latinos who care about the election and have participated in the election so far, which is pretty significant, and it is an opportunity for both parties to, you know, invest in and capitalize on. But that requires them to listen to them first. Latinos are the largest minority voting bloc, largest eligible minority voting bloc in this election. Somewhere around 14 million are projected to be to participate in the election. That's still less than half of eligible Latinos. There is a lot of opportunity here.
That's great. Thanks, Christian. Ron, our last question is to you. I want you to give us some of your magic numbers that you're looking for tonight. I have my own theories about what states might be surprisingly predictive. So for example, I don't see a lot of people talking about New Hampshire and Minnesota, but both those states should report most of their ballots tonight. Both of those states, Hillary Clinton won barely by about 0.5% in New Hampshire and 1.5% in Minnesota. Biden is projected to win both of those by 8, 9, 10-ish% this year. And if he does match his polls in those states, I think it could be very predictive of how he does across the rest of the upper Midwest, which we might not get a lot of meaningful returns from in the next 24 hours. So Ron, give me some of the magic numbers and sort of predictive zones that you might be looking for tonight.
First, I think that's a really good suggestion for people because, you know, some of the other states that report early include a lot of southern states, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia. And there is a huge gap, Derek, in this election between the way non-college whites in the South and non-college whites in the North have been polling. I mean, Trump is still at around 70% or more among non-college whites in the South. And as I said, Biden's kind of unique contribution to the Democratic fortunes is that he may be able to improve back into the 40% or plus range in the North. So, you know, if you get results from North Carolina and Georgia and Trump is still blowing off the doors in kind of small town blue collar counties, oh boy, you know, it's going to be just as bad among non-college whites. No, Minnesota actually and North New Hampshire, as you suggest, can give you a better gauge on maybe what's going to happen among those blue collar whites in the big three of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even Ohio, which is kind of like lurking around in the mix. So that's a good idea. The other thing, you know, again, like I will be watching mid-sized blue collar industrial cities in the North and white collar suburbs in the South. So talk to me about Gwinnett and Cobb and Mecklenburg and Wake and, you know, does Seminole County flip in Florida? You know, Texas is another state that reports pretty early. You know, again, we know the numbers are going to be huge in the urban centers, but what about Williamson and Hayes outside of Austin or Fort Bend outside of Houston? And then maybe above all, Collin and Denton outside of Dallas. I mean, if Biden is running close to even in Collin County, it is going to be a big night. You know, the one, like for me, the tip off in 2018 was Abigail Spanberger. Like, I remember I spent 2018, I was on CNN the morning after, and people don't know this, there are two magic walls. There's a backup magic wall. And I spent election night with the team that was kind of managing the magic wall. And, you know, they're like data guys. They can make the magic wall, sit up, dance, do anything, but they don't really know what to ask it. Like they're coding guys. So they asked me, since I wasn't on until the next morning, and since I love all this stuff, to spend the night with them. And, you know, people on the air and all the networks were like, is the blue wave coming? Is it happening? And we had like poked into the magic wall districts above a certain share of college graduates. And because it's one of the things I asked them to program into it a couple of days earlier. And when it came up that Abigail Spanberger was winning in I think it was the 7th outside of Richmond, it was like, this is going to be really big. And so people on all three networks are still like, well, you know, Kentucky, Amy McGrath didn't. No. So like, I kind of think that if you see Collin County, you know, if you see this spreading, if you see Gwinnett and Cobb coming in over 100,000 for Biden, I mean, I don't know if that's going to be enough to win Georgia, but it kind of gives you an idea of like, if even Cobb and Gwinnett are going that big, what's going to happen in Oakland County and Montgomery County and Dane County when we get all the votes. So again, blue collar cities in the North, mid-sized, big white collar suburbs in the South, diverse white collar suburbs in the South. That's kind of where I'll have my eye.
Great. Awesome. Ron, Christian, thank you so much for this. This is really, really educational for me. And I will be following both of you on television and on Twitter later tonight. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't voted, please vote. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe.
In that order.
In that order, exactly. Yeah, one is slightly more urgent, but yes. Barely. Thank you so much for watching us, and please have a safe and healthy day. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.